Before the storm, the underwear Olympics are finally behind us. Incredibly athletic dudes went to Indianapolis and did incredibly athletic things. But what does it all mean? And does any of it matter? Plus, we have the QB market finally taking shape, pro days, free agency, fast approaching, and hopefully so are some fresh betting markets, because that's why we're here. Let's talk about the NFL draft. We're going to unpack that all and more on this episode of Move the Line. Let's cue the music. Hello and welcome to Move the Line. I'm Ryan Noonan, joined, as always, in this spot as we are thirsting for some more action. Post-Combine, it is Connor Allen. How we doing?
Doing well. Good to be back. Good to be talking some football. The Combine was obviously awesome to see, all the good 40s, all the stuff going on there. But overall, I'm excited to start betting on the draft a little bit, get a few more markets out.
Joining us again, our expert mock drafter here, unpacked his previous mock draft, first one on the site. Actually, Connor put one out on the site as well. I'm sure we'll touch base on some of the things that Connor put in his. Free for you to read over on 4for4.com. Scott Smith. Scott, how we doing?
Good, man. Coming in off the road. I got to watch some of the underwear Olympics and unpack some of the data that's coming in and just some of the info coming out from some of the beat writers across the league. And hey, we've got some quarterback dominoes falling as well. So a lot to unpack today. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it too. And as I mentioned, I think we're still just before it. So I don't want to throw a wet blanket on anything. I feel like we're really close. I feel like having the new league year, which is the 15th, we're coming to that time. I think all that really matters because we need some of these dominoes to fall. But we're close. We're close enough to definitely continue to talk about what we've heard, what we've seen. Some of the things that I think come out of the Combine are actionable. There are things out there to bet on right now, and we're going to have time to get some of the answers. Right now, it's, and I'm there with you. I comb through it all and I want to fire at some stuff. Have a couple of things that I want to toss to you guys that I want to maybe fire at, even though we don't necessarily know the answers. So I would say proceed with caution, continue to tune in, read Connor's mock draft, go back and read Scott's, take in as much information as you can so that when we can hit the ground running here in the coming days and weeks as things start to mature and information becomes a little bit more actionable. Before we get into it, I want to tell you real quick, we're going to have a lot of great content. Betting subscription live on the site over at 4for4.com/plans. Betting sub takes you through the full year, access to everything. If you grind season long, DFS, betting, whatever it is, other sports, college hoops, NBA, lots of great stuff. That's the best way to get it. Right now, if you want to get just a taste of what we have going on and you want to get some of this draft stuff, we've partnered with Vivid. Vivid Seats. Go on there and get your secondary tickets. Vivid also has a Pick'em app, similar to some other ones that out there right now. Deposit on Vivid, $15. Use our promo code 4for4bets. So 4for4, as you see behind me, BETS, $15, and you get access for 3 months, Connor?
Yep, 3 months.
3 months betting sub at 4for4 to get a check, get your feet wet. It'll take you through all the stuff obviously we have going on the betting side right now through the draft, which is going to be an exciting time. So I'll kick it to you, Connor. Let me know what you think. Give me some of your takeaways. We can get into some position by position stuff, but I think you can make the case that the Combine is a little bit nonsense. We know some guys don't do everything. We got Bryce Young on the scale. He checked in over 200 pounds, drank a shitload of water. If you thought Bryce Young was too small, you probably still think he's too small. If you like Bryce Young, you probably still like Bryce Young, even though he made this arbitrary threshold of weight. But what are some actionable things that you think came out of Indy last week?
Yeah, well, I guess something that's less actionable, but something that's worth noting here would be Anthony Richardson's just meteoric rise up in the draft odds. Just 2 weeks ago, he was 50-1. Now we're looking at 3-1, 4-1 in most places. There was a mock that came out with the Colts trading up to 1 to select Anthony Richardson from a beat writer before the Combine. Then he goes to the Combine, runs in the 4.4s, is obviously, 6'4", 244, insane athlete. I mean, this is one of the best athletic performances that we've seen essentially of all time at the Combine. But it's almost double counting. It is like, we knew he was athletic. If you go watch the tape, I mean, he's running away from dudes. He's bowling over guys. Like he does look like Cam Newton at times when he was at Auburn. Like those are things where, we know those existed, but then we see him do it at the combine, and now everyone's double counting, getting excited, steaming to that number one market. I'd be interested in Scott's take here, but for me, I am not chasing Anthony Richardson's steam. I think that he's a fine player. He's a project. The upside's there, but based on what we're hearing, it doesn't seem very substantive with the steam right now. It seems mostly just kind of double counting based off that combine.
Scott, do you need your quarterback to have a 10-foot 9-inch broad jump?
No, I don't. I mean, you look at the successful quarterbacks over the years, and Tom Brady's and guys like that aren't doing anything close to that. I think the guys that were on Anthony Richardson are still on Anthony Richardson, but I don't think he's there. He's just not going to be the first quarterback pick. There's still holes in his game. Everything that we thought about Anthony Richardson before the draft is still before the combine is still sitting there the same. We knew he was going to test well, much better than what the rest of the quarterbacks in this draft class were going to test. And to me, I actually think that Bryce Young weighing in where he weighed in at is bigger than anything that Anthony Richardson did at the combine.
Interesting. Yeah. I like that take. We'll have pro day Alabama. We'll, script that and schedule that out under the perfect conditions, reading some, reports. Scouts thought it was actually a pretty good thing that he didn't go and throw in comparison to like a massive beast of Anthony Richardson or even Will Levis. And obviously CJ Stroud went out and had himself a nice week, because I think some of the things that people like about Bryce Young and how they think he translates to the NFL, his ability to throw, off balance and off script and, creating, that's not going to show up in the structure of the combine. So the pro days are going to matter too. Again, those are always interesting and I think are important, but it makes sense that, hey, what's he going to weigh? He's probably not going to weigh in again at Alabama's pro day. He already weighed in. He got the threshold. He met the 204 and I was feeling pretty good about it, but it's definitely an interesting takeaway considering like, we knew this dude was huge and fast, Richardson, right? Like it's incredible to see there. We're seeing some things that we've never seen before, but like I think there are still some limitations in terms of him being a pocket passer. To Connor's point, we've moved, right? We've moved from 30 to 3. If you had the 30, congratulations. You were sitting at 3 with really no other information other than he went out and did what we thought he was going to do. If we really get to a point where there is a trade to the number one spot, and it becomes clear that he is the target, and that moves very quickly, and that moves to minus 200. I will make the case that I think betting into the minus 200 with some information is way better than sitting here firing into the plus 300 when I think you can make a case for all 4 dudes. And maybe Will Levis is slipping out of that mix, but like, I don't know, it just takes one, right? The one team that trades up is identify Will Levis as the guy. I think they're all in the mix, Connor. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I really think that right now laying any kind of juice is probably the worst bet on the board. And so Bryce Young for me is not a good bet at this point, even though I think he's probably the most likely to go number one. We just don't know. And then beyond that too, like chasing the scene with Anthony Richardson just doesn't make sense. Like we have no idea other than what we've already seen. And there's been a lot of rumors like, coaches like this guy or GMs are fascinated with his upside. Those are quotes that have been pulled out from different sources. If we look at the teams in the top 10 here, none of them are really, there's only 2 teams that I see that are really equipped to handle a guy that has the upside and really capitalize on that. And that to me, that's the Seahawks and the Lions, because they have a quarterback in place that can sit and they can let Anthony Richardson sit for a year. I mean, imagine if he goes to the Texans and plays week 1. He's going to get wrecked. Like, I think a great example and an easy comparison for listeners to understand would be if you watch Justin Fields when he played for like a couple weeks in his rookie year. It was a complete disaster. Like it was a train wreck. He wasn't reading everything. And Justin Fields was a significantly better passer in college than Anthony Richardson was. And still was, relatively lost because he didn't have anyone around him. He didn't have a scheme around him. He didn't have, he wasn't able to translate that right away and needed a lot of work. And that's going to be what Anthony Richardson is, except double the issues, I think, which is a really scary to think about. And he's just going to have to rely on his athleticism.
Yes, and Scott, it doesn't sound like he necessarily wowed people in the interview section. I think maybe in terms of whiteboard, he's probably 4 of the 4. I think that matters. We've seen it less and less over the last handful of years. Guys going at or near the top, sitting a little bit. Connor just referenced, Justin Fields. We had Trey Lance obviously sat for a while. Baker Mayfield, I think, is the last 101 that I can think of that didn't start for, it's his team right away. We definitely know that, again, teams are getting smarter. They know they have to capitalize on that rookie window, and being able to basically redshirt a guy for a year. He's that dude. Teams are probably willing to do it. It's one of those picks where your basically job is on the line, right? If it doesn't land.
Yeah, and I think that's the case for both the GMs and the coaches in this position. And you really just have to look at where he's at developmentally as a passer. You look at the quarterbacks that compare to him, and you look at Lamar Jackson. We talked about Lamar Jackson and where he's at. Lamar Jackson was a lot further along as a passer and able to do a lot of the things, albeit with a smaller frame than what Anthony Richardson has. But I still say the same thing that we said on the last show. He's still a year or two away, and it's going to take the right team that has both the GM and the coach on a solid footing to go ahead and take him to wait, because you're not getting 4 years or 5 years of production on this rookie contract. You're getting 3, maybe, and that's what you're going to have to make a decision. And there's some coaches drafting here and some GMs drafting here in the top 10 that don't have that luxury of being able to sit for that 1 or 2 years and wait for that production. So I look at it, and specifically when you start talking about Anthony Richardson, where he was in mock drafts pre-combine, he was sitting around 10, 11 spot. Right now, after the combine, mock drafts are shifting. A lot of people got hyped up about his production and what he did at the combine, and now he's sitting in combines at an average pick of 5.6 right now. So they've moved him up into the top 6 range. So I could see him there with a team like Seattle, with a team like Detroit, right there in that 5 to 6 range. But I absolutely do not buy the steam, do not buy the juice that he's moving up and will be a top overall pick there. So it's a bet that I'm staying away from. I think when we start talking about that first overall pick, it's going to be very much team dependent. But I think you're really looking at either CJ Stroud or Bryce Young.
And until we know, Connor, it's really hard to continue to speculate. But let's bring up the number 1 pick odds onto the screen here. If you're listening in audio podcast form, we appreciate it. Rate and review while you're there helps us a ton. We're also doing this on YouTube as well, and we can show you some of the cool tools and stuff that we have on our back end. We have a new tool that just launched that we can show you basically an odds board where you can get the best odds all in one screen. Domestics only, of course. But it gives you an idea of kind of where we're at in the market. And what Connor continues to reference is, laying any juice at this point. Bryce Young across the board is, minus 134 on PointsBet's the best number to be the first overall pick. And I think I agree with Connor's point there that holding off and laying juice until we really know who's making that pick is probably advised. You can see the movement here. CJ Stroud is the other kind of the belle of the ball in terms of what happened last week in Indy. Just very safe, checked out, in terms of the size that we were looking for. Maybe not the athlete that an Anthony Richardson is, or even maybe a Will Levis, but deep ball accuracy was pretty fantastic. He's moved quite a bit as well. Any takeaways here, Connor? I know you're not necessarily firing into this market right now, but how would you approach it?
Yeah, my 2 small positions that I have right now is I took a little bit of CJ Stroud at plus 400. I took a little bit of Will Levis at 16-1 right now. I think that's still fine. I'm talking about a really small chunk of change here if you want to speculate on the market, because if you look at the pro day schedule here, I believe something that Scott's been keeping track of here and just notified me of is that we see Ohio State's pro day first. So if you do want to action on Bryce Young or you want action on someone else, generally the way these markets work is right after the pro day, you're going to get a ton of reports, be like, hey, this guy, every team loves this guy. Look at how good he was in the pro day. Look at how amazing he is, and then the odds move accordingly because a lot of it's just steam based until there's information, and there won't be information for, a month and a half at this point, probably a month or so. So if you want a Bryce Young, if you want, an Anthony Richardson, I would wait until the pro day, and you can wait till CJ Stroud's odds get juiced up a little bit. But then we're getting Alabama's pro day the next day. So you have a short window. You have like a 6-hour window, probably 6 to 10 hour window at night where you'll be able to get it. So that's probably my biggest takeaway, and something that it's just a little key there for draft betting, that wait till the pro days. The most hype is right after their pro day. Like that is like the peak of every player's hype.
We're going to all get the clip. They're going to run that like play action bootleg, on the run throw. That's an absolute laser down the middle of the field to, some little dude in shorts and a t-shirt running uncovered. It's going to be a dime and people are going to just go nuts. It's just like an annual thing. It's the Zach Wilson throw, it's solidified Zach Wilson. And it's like, how did that work out? But it's coming. I promise. We're definitely seeing it. We'll see it for all these dudes. And, I understand we're excited. So I don't mean to be a wet blanket on anyone's excitement around some of these things. I just think it's like, you got to be careful. You just got to, whenever just because it's there doesn't mean we have to yet. We will get, some answers to the test at some point. And I think proceeding with caution is probably the right way to do it. I still think at this point, looking at that board, I still think Will Levis is probably the best way to get in on the top. Like, you just can have a team identify him as being their guy. And I don't think there's a massive differentiator between all of them. And he's the best odds on the board, the longest odds. So again, it takes one team. We have, again, we've talked about early, we have some quarterback free agency shifting, but we still have these teams, the Texans, and we can get to that. There's been reports that, hey, Texans aren't an obvious play to take a quarterback, which seems unlikely, but maybe, right? But Texans, the Colts, the Panthers, we don't know what a bunch of these other teams are going to do as well. Like, there are a handful of, the Raiders need a quarterback. So it feels like there are clear sets, but if one of them wants to move up to get one to identify their guy, it could be all of them, right? Just a couple of years ago, we were removed from it definitely being Mac Jones. The Niners made the trade. Everyone lost their mind, and it was going to be Mac Jones. And everyone thought they liked Justin Fields, but then it's like, oh no, it ended up being Trey Lance. And I think we're still kind of in this a little bit of silly phase of not knowing. And at that point, if you feel inclined that you have to bet in this market, I would say proceed with caution, sprinkle, like Connor said, and look for the longest odds on the board.
I do want to say too, shout out to us, because Will Levis on our last episode was plus like 500 to be the number one overall pick. And we all said like, hey, like, hold on a little bit, you'll get better odds. I didn't think we'd ever see a 16-1 again, but like at this point, I mean, again, like, worth like a little shot here. But I do want to touch on the one thing you mentioned there, and I want Scott's opinion. There was thoughts on, like, they said the Houston Texans came out and were like, hey, like, well, they might not take a quarterback. To me, that seems like fluff. Like, to me, that seems like total BS. Just given where they're at as a franchise. Are you buying that at all, Scott?
No. I mean, you looked at what they did last year and how anemic that offense was and the pieces that they need. And they're just not in a position to ride another year the way that they rode last year. And you look at the quarterbacks that they have on the board right now, I think there's a strong case for, either Stroud or Bryce Young to be there in that top two. I think it's just a little bit of fluff, to entice some of these teams to come in and make highball offers and think that, hey, if say Bryce Young's the top overall pick and another team really values CJ Stroud, it could be Houston, who may have a higher valuation on Will Levis, but is willing to move down a couple of spots and take a guy like Levis and recoup a lot of draft stock to go ahead and move down and do so. So I think when you start hearing some of these things, that's what you have to start looking at is, does a team like Houston have maybe a higher grade on Levis than what they do on some of these other quarterbacks, or a marginal, threshold in between how they grade these guys that could have a similar grade on two guys, and they're willing to take the one that's lower if that means, recouping more draft stock.
Also with the Texans too, if we go back to last year, one of Casario's kind of first substantial drafts, we did not know shit until like 24 hours before the draft, where they're like, oh, could be Derek Stingley. And I believe it was Lance Zierlein. So that's going to be kind of my go-to guy for Texan stuff this year, because a lot of the local guys were wrong. I mean, across the board, including the Jets and other places as well. But he was the one, I believe, who got the first scoop. He was like, hey, like, I'm hearing Derek Stingley is very much in play. And all of us kind of, I mean, we didn't discount it. We got on the 40-1, because the odds were 40-1.
One of the best tickets of the weekend. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Walker Hutch Stingley 40-1 was incredible. But at the same time, like, it just goes to show, like, we're hearing this now means nothing. Like, to me, it means nothing.
I agree. I think it's posturing. The pushback would be that division's kind of garbage, right? They could probably be serviceable, but do they even want to? Because there's a clear prize at the end of next season, right? And if you need a quarterback, putting yourself in position to, draft Caleb Williams it is different. So again, it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell to, ownership, the first year coach for sure, a GM who's, maybe fighting to keep his job. It's a little bit harder of a sell. So I do think it's posturing to, Connor and Scott's point, but I think it is important to understand like what's there at the end of the tunnel, leveraging to get one of these guys, to get the fourth of these guys, whoever you think that is, because someone's going to get the fourth of them, right? Like they are going to tell you absolutely that was their number one quarterback on the board, regardless of what happens, right? Whoever takes the guy number 4, well, we didn't have to move up to get him because we knew, but like it's just very different next year where there feels like a real layup in comparison to what's happened the last couple of years at the quarterback position, really, right?
Yeah.
Outside of Trevor Lawrence, we knew that was happening. Caleb feels like the same kind of guy.
100%. But I think in an ideal world, you're totally right. You tank, you're like from a long-term perspective, you have a very clear plan. Okay, get the number 1 pick next year. But I think Davis Mills and Lovie Smith might have something to say about that after this year when they
went 3-2-1 in the division last year. 3-2-1 in that division with that coach
man.
and all that. Yeah. So like they might not even be able to tank because the rest of the division is so bad.
Yeah. I it's just like, obviously in theory, it sounds great, but it's just something that's like so hard to do in practice. Like you think D'Amico Ryan's going to come in there and be like, oh yeah, sure, I'm on board with that. Like you need like 5 years of job security to be willing to do that. And I mean, I don't think anyone in the NFL has that outside of a couple people. So
yeah. Other big shift and probably, a highlight that happened from the combine was at the wide receiver position. It was a position that we think is, it's down in comparison to other seasons pretty frequently. And we know early in the mock season, it is a lot of cut and paste, right? We don't have a lot of fully formed opinions. We don't have a lot of, information. And again, I want to stress free agency goes a long way in shaping these team needs. Very often we were seeing Quentin Johnston, the big wide receiver from TCU, being the first wide receiver in most mock drafts. I think it became very clear over the weekends with the testing and some of the things that we saw from Jaxon Smith-Njigba that he is very likely the first wide receiver off the board. That is now reflected, as you can see here, looking at our odds table in the marketplace. Obviously, we had some concerns about JSN after not playing a full season last year, some size concerns, how would he fit? And I think that's kind of, indicative of this entire class, is I think these guys are, more so than just plug and play wide receiver ones. Some of these guys are a little bit more scheme dependent, but I think what JSN did was pretty impressive. Scott, I don't know what your takeaways were. The 3-cone stuff, I think some of that could be nonsense in terms of like what position is doing it. It matters at the wide receiver position, and he went out there and was electric in testing.
Yeah, I think he answered a lot of questions and reminded people of who he was. He came in, measured a little bit bigger than I thought he was, 6 foot and 5/8 inches, 196 pounds. But when we start talking about that 3-cone drill, especially for guys that work out of the slot, 6.57 seconds, and then came in with the 20-yard short shuttle, 3.93 seconds. That's 96th and 97th percentile testing at the wide receiver position for 2 drills that we do see. It suggests that you're going to have success there at that level. You start looking into some of the fantasy analytics that we look at with, when they have a breakout and things like that, he's got that on his side. So I think he did himself well in one of the biggest jumps that we see here. And look, even from a mock draft standpoint, his numbers are going up. So he's actually overtaken Jordan Addison in a lot of mock drafts as the second wide receiver taken. We're talking about, the argument, is he going to be the first? I think you can argue that. Quentin Johnston weighed in and measured a little bit smaller than what some people thought. He was listed at 6'4" at Texas Christian, but he came in at 6'2" at the combine. So there is some argument there for Jaxon Smith-Njigba and what he did. And I think that's some hype that's going to roll over into his pro day.
Is this bettable right now, Connor? Plus 125 on FanDuel.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that this is a little bit of an overreaction. I thought that again, before the combine, he was like plus 300, plus 400 to be the first wide receiver. And then he didn't run the 40. Addison just did and then hurt himself by doing that, because Addison was the favorite at like minus 110 heading into the combine. And so right now, I think it's notable. Daniel Jeremiah actually bumped Addison up somehow in his rankings, has him 9th overall in his top 50. And generally, Daniel Jeremiah's rankings are a blend of what he's hearing from teams in addition to his own evaluations. Now, he was higher on him before the combine as well. But if we look at Jordan Addison, like his route running is really smooth. Sam Hoppin, kind of did a blend of route running versus man, route running versus zone, and like put a chart together. JSN sophomore season was incredible, like broke the chart. But Jordan Addison season, the last season was incredible as well. So we're looking at plus 550 at DraftKings. I mean, if I have to play this market, I'm not currently playing it. If I have to play it, I think that's probably where I go, plus 550 for Addison, or even further down the board at plus 750 at DraftKings on Zay Flowers, because we're getting a ton of hype as well. But personally, I think Njigba should be the favorite. I think he's likely to be the favorite, but I'm not willing to lay juice right now with such a situation where you don't have, like, these guys aren't going like top 6, top 10. Like, you don't have penciled in slots for them. There's so much more volatility after you get outside of like the first 10 picks, because a team could trade up and really love a guy and pick them over JSN. So for me, it's kind of a stay away in this market.
Yeah, it's understandable. I get it. You make a good point. I mean, it's shifted, but maybe too much. The one thing that I think is interesting here is that we go out and we have some great testing, and thought some of the movement stuff is incredible, but it becomes like Brian Hartline, former NFL receiver, now the wide receiver coach at Ohio State. Even the guys that played with him, Olave, Garrett Wilson, are like. But again, it's not unlikely or uncommon for a guy to go to bat for his dude who things of what they're saying. I don't know. Do you make anything to that, Scott, with some of the stuff that's coming out of Ohio State and the love that JSN is getting?
No, I mean, look, the Ohio State guys tout for the Ohio State guys. I mean, it's the Ohio State. They're going to go ahead and do that, and it's the same thing you've seen even with the Alabama guys. Like, you had a lot of the Alabama guys, even with Tua and what Tua was doing. The wide receivers that were coming out of Alabama were all touting for Mac Jones when it was Mac Jones' turn to come in through the draft. So that's just something that's gonna go ahead and happen. And I think when you start looking at some of these players and where they're going and what's happening, like, a lot of the movement that you're seeing is coming from guys and coming from people in the media that aren't necessarily as tuned in as some of the other people. I don't think some of these big swings that you have, even with guys with Jaxon Smith-Njigba, like the hype that he's getting post-combine, I don't think that the combine did that much to go ahead and move any front offices to move him 10 picks. I always kind of say it's a plus minus 5 picks as far as like movement goes. You're not going to have a player really jump from being a mid-20s prospect to being a top 10 prospect. So I still think, as far as Jaxon Smith-Njigba, did he do extra stuff at the combine that can go ahead and move him to being the first wide receiver drafted? I think there is a little bit there that you can look into. But as far as him having a drastic movement in the first round and having, some of the stuff that's coming out of Ohio State, those guys are going to tout, and it's not going to move the needle with the front office. The things that move the needle with front offices are things that we're not privy to, and a lot of that comes with interviews at the combine. That's the most important thing that happens at the combine, other than medical information that we don't have access to.
Yeah. That's like the heart of how it started. It just was like a place to like poke and prod and like legally get ways to get their medical information, and like, well, might as well have them run some routes while we're here. Like, we're going to go to dinner for a little bit. We got all their medicals. Let's have them come here together and do some stuff. So interesting times. So let's shift really quick to the defensive side. I think some of the biggest news since we last met was the Jalen Carter situation, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. Obviously, unless you've been living under a rock for a week. I mean, if you're plugged into this show and you don't know what happened with Jalen Carter, it's a very weird Venn diagram. But obviously, some legal issues that's happened and shifted first defensive player market. We jumped on it right away, Connor, when it first came out, because we thought that the Will Anderson number at like plus 340 was just really off, when it felt like there was still more of a coin flip situation in terms of who was going to end up taking and making that pick. In terms of the needs at the top of the board, even with the Bears, if the Bears were to theoretically, worst case scenario, stay home and make a pick, which again doesn't feel likely. But now we've obviously seen a shift. But again, as these things kind of do, they've softened a little bit. Looks like Carter maybe end up dodging the real legal bullets here. Obviously, people lost their lives, so I don't want to be insensitive. Again, we're a draft betting show here, so again, I know what happened. Terrible situation, and Carter obviously did something that I'm sure he regrets, hopefully. How does it impact him, Connor, in terms of draft slots and in terms of the betting market?
Yeah, this is tough because Bob McGinn came out today and he does a great job kind of surveying people and said like, oh, like NFL teams don't really care about this, and that's I wouldn't doubt that. I think to some extent, almost certainly true, because it looks like his legal issues are probably done at this point. But I think the concerns with most teams is like, okay, well, am I picking this guy, who's probably more talented or arguably more talented than Will Anderson at his position? But like, he's not necessarily clean, because there was other rumors beforehand about character issues there. Plus, if you look at the situation, I mean, it's not about what he did or didn't do. It's about like, everyone there was drunk. Everyone there was driving. Like, to me, like from an outsider's perspective, that's probably going to cause a lot of red flags for a lot of teams. And so, like, I think that is another issue that some teams might find. Now, if they don't care about that, which again, they might not, the NFL is very much a profit oriented business. I think that he's very much in play to still be like a top 5-6 pick. Personally, I think that this probably makes him fall behind Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson. He's like right in that range. He can go anywhere after that. I had him falling all the way to 12, but I think that's too far, in my latest mock. I think that he's probably more in that like 6 to 10 range. That being said, Tyree Wilson also came out talking about 2 Jones fractures in each of his feet. So like, if his medicals don't check out, I mean, Tyree Wilson could fall down again, but he got pumped up pretty early in draft season where like people knew about this. Teams were saying that he, multiple media members said that he was the next like Trayvon Walker kind of ascension. So I'm kind of holding on to that. I think Tyree Wilson's still ahead of Jalen Carter, but I think it's a little bit closer, because I'm starting to think the Carter stuff just like doesn't matter as much anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah. Scott, what are your takeaways on how the Carter movement and all that's going on there?
Yeah, as soon as this information came out, and I did a little bit of digging into it, as soon as I saw it was misdemeanors, I didn't think there was going to be that much movement. There's some other things behind the scene with the interview process, and you talked about the Bob McGinn article. It came out basically that he's not a guy that gives 100% effort on every play. He does loaf and get by on some of his physical attributes and things of that nature. But as far as the actual legal implications, he immediately left the combine, answered to things. It ended up being 2 misdemeanors. I don't want to downplay the real life situation of what happened, because like you said, some lives were lost in it. But as far as the NFL concerns, this isn't a situation that's going to have him missing any significant amount of time his rookie year or anything of that nature. And you've seen the NFL have much harsher incidents that happen and not be as concerned about it. I think they charged him with a reckless driving and racing or something of that nature, which he answered to 2 misdemeanors. I just don't think it's going to move his draft stock. The biggest issue with it, I think it does kind of solidify Will Anderson. Tyree Wilson is moving up the boards. I had him slotted at 5 to Seattle in my initial mock draft. And I think you could see him jump Jalen Carter, but I still think the biggest information out of this is going to be Will Anderson kind of being solidified as that first defensive player off the board.
Yeah, feel pretty good about that one too, regardless of what happens. And so, yeah, it's a good place to be. And again, part of why you want to jump into the Discord over at 444, because that is something that we've been thirsty. We got a lot of like-minded folks that are dying for these markets to populate. And if Connor and I or Scott don't catch it first, there's a chance that one of our subscribers finds it pretty quickly after it populates. So, we're able to get down on that 340 on Anderson and feel like that's some warm closing line value in these last cold days of March to keep you warm until the draft gets here.
Yeah.
What are the other markets? Oh, go ahead, Connor.
I was going to say the last thing related to this market is that something that I've been thinking about a lot is that I think there's a chance both the Bears and the Cardinals trade down, and this market becomes very sloppy then, because I feel pretty confident that the Bears, would take one of these guys. I feel pretty confident that the Cardinals would take one of these kind of defensive linemen. But Seattle, I have no idea. They've been slotted that way, but I think that there's an outside chance they wouldn't. Detroit at 6, would they take the first corner off the board? I mean, those are right now are like 50 to 1, for Christian Gonzalez, maybe even way more for Devin Witherspoon if somehow he got taken there. I think there's could be a lot happening here. So like, I don't want to I think Will Anderson is rightfully the favorite given the board we have now. Like, by a lot, maybe it's a little short if the board were to stay where it's at right now, like if there's no trades. But overall, like I think that there's could be a lot of volatility if we see trades at 3 and at 1.
I mean, I'm here for Witherspoon at 6 to Detroit. You know this. I think that's a fantastic pick. I think he fits their scheme even a little bit better. I know Christian Gonzalez went out, and we're going to talk about the cornerback market here. Went out and had a great combine, but also like kind of double counting. No one expected Christian Gonzalez to not go out and have a great combine. Have seen some scouts talk about their concerns about his ability to get involved in the running game defensively. Whereas that is not on Devin Witherspoon's tape. That is not in Devin Witherspoon's meetings, apparently. So 3-1 for Witherspoon to be the first cornerback off the board. Gonzalez is the favorite. FanDuel is the best current number, minus 195. I think Witherspoon is the play here. I have not fired this market, but again, I think it's way too close. So this is to me reminiscent of a little bit of that initial market that we just talked about with Carter and Will Anderson, where I feel like it probably should be closer to a coin flip. I understand why Gonzalez should maybe be the favorite, but I don't think that there should be this large of a discrepancy. And it feels, based off talking to some other folks, that they kind of have pulled away. Even a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this kind of being maybe a 3-guy race. People think Joey Porter Jr. is probably more scheme specific. He seems to be falling into maybe the teens in that range a little bit more than making a case to be a top 10 guy, which I think you can make the case for both Gonzalez and Witherspoon being. So, Scott, any thoughts on the cornerback market?
Yeah, I think it's a 2-horse race there between Gonzalez and Witherspoon for the first one to come off the board. I think a lot of it is going to be very scheme specific. Gonzalez is going to be the bigger player there. Witherspoon's a little bit undersized, but like what you see on tape with him, he can do it all. I mean, he can do everything that you want out of this. Right now in the mock draft market, we've got Gonzalez sitting around pick 8.5 and Witherspoon at like 13.3. So right now the mock draft market still has Gonzalez a little bit ahead. I personally lean a little bit more towards Gonzalez, but it's a little bit more of a personal preference than anything. But sitting here looking at these numbers, it's not a play that I would look to make with Gonzalez at minus 195 and minus 220, respectively, on FanDuel and DraftKings. So I think for now, it's definitely something from a betting standpoint that you can stay away from as far as Gonzalez is concerned.
Yeah, I would almost rather wait until we get like a team specific market, because I think Witherspoon to the Lions makes a ton of sense. If that happens, he will be the first corner drafted, but you'll get much better odds than plus 300. So if, I would probably rather play that than play the plus 300 right now on first cornerback drafted, because if we look at, Witherspoon played 75% plus man coverage at Illinois, and the Lions were like top 6 in man coverage rate in the NFL. So I think schematically, not to mention he's super physical, like very, maybe not stature wise, but just in his play style. And so I think that could be a great fit. I know Noonan's talked about it before as well. But other than that, I think most teams probably prefer Christian Gonzalez. So, I think the odds are right. It's just that maybe if the Lions decide to go corner, it wouldn't surprise me to be Witherspoon. So, I don't know. I think that, I would probably just wait. But I do think that you're right, Scott, that Gonzalez is probably the play, just maybe at better odds if you can wait a little bit.
Another one that we obviously are still waiting for, we don't have yet, is the number of corners in the first round. And just some other guys that are down towards the bottom of this list that you can see here on the odds screen. Some of them went out and had really good combines, and that could be very interesting. I think Deonte Banks, probably out of Maryland, made himself some money with a really nice combine. I know some teams, I've heard some people talk rave reviews for Clark Phillips. Again, probably not in the discussion for first overall, but Kelly Ringo was definitely during the college football season kind of, earmarked as one of the top corners on the board here. Some people really like Cam Smith. Some people think Emmanuel Forbes, has incredible ball skills, and he has some, some pretty good highlights out there too. So it's going to be very interesting to see what that number comes out at. How is Brian Branch classified? I think that's a big one too. We ran into that a little bit in years past with worried about safety corner. Feels like Branch could be a sneaky corner, even though he mostly played safety. Be interested to see what teams want him to do, but I think that speaks to his versatility as a player. But again, the tapes may be better than the measurables, and maybe he's falling in some spots too, because he's not overly tall, not overly fast, didn't weigh in massively, but it looks like he's going to be classified as a corner. That safety market in a pretty poor safety class could be interesting, depending on what that opens up at when those numbers come out. So overall, probably one of the deeper positions in this draft, which isn't necessarily a great draft overall from a depth standpoint. So going to be interesting to watch.
What would you set the over under at? Like, I don't know. Either of you guys have an idea? Like 4.5, like is the normal, but it looks like there's like 6, 7 guys who could realistically go.
Yeah, for me, looking at just who I have here in the top 50, and it's dependent upon how you're going to classify Branch. I've got 6 cornerbacks in the first round with first round grades. We're talking Gonzalez, Witherspoon, Porter, and then Keeler Ringo, Banks, and then Cam Smith, with Phillips looking on the outside. The other guys that you kind of look at, Antonio Johnson is going to be classified as a safety. So those are the guys that I'm looking at. I think that number might end up being right there around that 5.5.
The interesting part is, again, this is what it comes down to, is trying to shape what happens at the back end of the first round. And it's tough because oftentimes, we'll make those bets based off of those teams' needs. And we often see a lot of movement and shifting in those late round picks too, which is tricky. Sometimes it's worked in our favor. Eric Stokes comes to mind, where we needed desperately double dip. Yeah, I think it's going to be right around there, 4.5, 5.5.
And the other thing you really have to start looking at when you're talking about some of these DBs and betting some of these over and unders on a positional like sense is you have to start looking at what other positions have the depth in the draft or lack of depth that's going to force, a player that might be a second round type of talent, but if the depth's not there behind them, gets drafted a little bit early in the back end of the first round. Edge is another position that you can kind of look at in this draft that may have some players that might be second round grades get pushed into that first round because of the depth and because of the talent that's there on the back half and the back end of the first round. So I think when you start betting this defensive back number, I think these defensive backs are going to be directly up against the talent of the defensive line and those edge positions there for those last 5 to 6 picks of the first round.
That is a great segue, transition to the tight end position, because the tight end market is very interesting. Want to get your guys' thoughts on what you think that number comes out at in terms of first off the board. We have Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame, just a massive human being, huge hands. I think people loved him in meetings, and he was able to play well throughout a lot of changes in Notre Dame, through a lot of inconsistent quarterback play, and continue to be one of the stalwarts in their offense. Dalton Kincaid is, I think pretty clearly the number 2. But maybe not, because Darnell Washington out of Georgia went out and had himself a pretty wild combine. He's moved quite a bit. And again, this is a freakishly huge human being, 6'7", 264, 11-inch hands, which are like, that's a lot of hands. I mean, like 9-inch hands are big. 11-inch hands are insane. They didn't ask him to do a lot in terms of catching the football and running routes at Georgia. Brock Bowers is a nice tight end prospect that they had there, and he's pretty much what everyone thinks about in terms of, Georgia tight ends. But big guy, 4'6", 40 for a huge human being like that. This is the 6th fastest among tight ends. And then some of these guys are a little bit, slighter in terms of their builds. Big broad jump, big 20-yard shuffle. Like, I don't know. He is a specimen. But again, like, does he feel like that type of dude that's going to work his way into the first round? I don't know. It's tricky. What are your thoughts, Connor?
I think he goes first round. I think I'm pretty confident that he goes towards I mean, people are talking about him as a tight end 1. I don't think he gets that high, but I think in like any time from the 20s, I think he's in play. I would want him to go to Detroit just so he can hold his hand up to Jared Goff and wrap his hands over them, because Goff's got little baby hands. But no, I think that there's an underrated tight end spot as well that when I started breaking it down a little bit. The Washington Commanders at 16 with hiring Eric Bieniemy to be their offensive coordinator, who's leveraged obviously Travis Kelce for a long time. I think would be a pretty interesting spot for a team that, desperately needs playmakers essentially across the board. So if they value the tight end position versus the wide receiver position a little bit more, they have at least McLaurin, they have a couple other guys that can make plays on there, but they need a lot of help across the board. So I had Dalton Kincaid slotted there, but really I think Michael Mayer as well could very well be the first, tight end off the board. I think right now, it's probably a coin flip for those guys. I'm not at the point where I would be comfortable taking both and just like profiting the juice, but I think that I don't think it's the worst. The worst thing ever is taking a stab on either if you get a kind of a good vibe of where one's going.
What are your thoughts, Scott?
Yeah, I think when you look at Washington, they've got Logan Thomas, who's battled injuries, last couple of years. I think he's a good cut candidate for Washington, and Washington has been in play. Disclaimer: I'm a Washington Commanders fan. It's been a rough number of years being a Washington fan, so they're a team that I keep up with quite a bit. And the news around them, and it's coming out, is that they took a lot of interest at the combine and interviewing a lot of these tight ends. So they're a team that is going to have a lot of smoke going there. The one of the rumors that I heard was that they're specifically looking for some offensive line play. Skoronski is the tackle out of Northwestern that a lot of people project more to a guard. I think they're looking for a player like that to go ahead and move down. The other big tackle there out of Georgia, he's one of the players that I think moved up the most after the combine, because I think a lot of people looked at what he did and started looking at his profile and how high he can move up. But the word out of Washington is that I think they're looking for offensive line. If that doesn't fall to them, they could be a team that moves back, recoup some more draft picks to make up for the Carson Wentz issues that they had, giving up all of those picks, and then taking a guy like Kincaid or taking a guy like Meyer as well in the first round. I think you have a good argument for three of these guys to go in the first round. Musgrave actually got cleared with some of the injury issues that he had. He's another guy that's moved up, but I don't think he's necessarily going to go there in that first round. But I think you have a good argument for three of these guys.
That's the interesting thing, though, is that and there is depth, right? So you mentioned Musgrave. Some people love Sam Laporta. Will Mallory out of Miami was pretty good. Zach Kuntz was like a freak testing. Like he broke a lot of tight end records and was up there as well, just doing some freakish things for a tight end. So I think there is depth at the position, which I think is one of the reasons to say, hey, if we want to address the position in the draft, do we want to go out and just address in the first round, or we're going to have a couple of seconds, or we can address it a little later in the draft? There are some guys that aren't necessarily huge drop-offs in terms of what we're going to be asking them to do. Because I also think this is another position that could be scheme fit, to Connor's point with like the big enemy thing. Like, yeah, do you want to have a move tight end like a Kincaid, like a Musgrave that fits a little bit more of the Travis Kelce profile? That really wasn't Darnell Washington in college. And I think asking him to do that at the next level is going to be probably a pretty tall ask. But it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The Washington Commanders thing makes sense. You got to get a quarterback, or you got to get a tight end for Lamar Jackson, right? Because that seems like a perfect fit made in heaven.
One of the interesting things about Darnell Washington and the combine, and this just goes to show how a lot of things work. You had a lot of clips get put up on Twitter of Darnell Washington high pointing the fade routes that they were throwing there at the combine. And then you had a whole group of people on Twitter that are, your couch scouts. They're talking about how much his release looked like shit in the drill itself. So, it's going to be all over the place, just window dressing of what you see from the combine from multiple standpoints.
Connor, you scoffed at me with my Lamar Jackson remarks. I'm
not sure if the Washington Commanders are strike me as a Lamar Jackson team generally, but I would love Lamar Jackson on any team that I root for, but I think just that made me laugh. Just picturing Lamar in a Washington Commanders uniform. Sorry.
He doesn't have to move, right? He stays right there. And I think the theory, has been floated a few times. I think it was actually even like a prank, the PFT commentator that went down. But I think there is something to the narrative of Daniel Snyder selling the team. We know this was a really weird thing, right? So again, not NFL draft stuff, but just NFL stuff in relation to what matters here. Very, very strange. I don't care what you think. The Lamar Jackson non-exclusive tag came out, and a handful of teams, all in which need quarterbacks, actively came out within 10 minutes to say, we are not interested in there, right? Like, so again, like collusion has been talked about a lot. People are mad about the Deshaun Watson deal, the guaranteed contract. no one would, it would be like perfect fitting Daniel Snyder, the big FU middle finger to the rest of the owners that are forcing him out essentially, right? Because he's not being forced out, but he kind of is being forced out, like sell your team. Just go ahead and double down and to throw one more guaranteed contract on the board to Lamar Jackson that he's not going to have to pay for on his way out the door. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I'm just saying it'd be interesting to see. I know that if I was a Commanders fan, I'd be hoping that my terrible owner both leaves and does this for us on the way out. But I think there's something there.
The collusion stuff is kind of interesting. I mean, but it was, the more that I thought about it, the more it makes sense that, so they can't really make a move until the new league year starts. So they have nothing to gain for saying that we're interested in a few days. One, two, because it pisses off whoever your current starter is or whatever your situation is. And like it gives the Ravens, or I get it, like changes the situation a little bit, I think, from, like saying like if there's 10 teams interested, then, I just think it changes the dynamic. Like there's no point of saying you're interested until the new league year starts. These guys are so selfish. They're going to bid on Lamar. Someone's going to do it. I mean, these guys are trotting out like Kyle Trask and, like a bunch of bums. Like there's like 15 teams who are starting like literally terrible quarterback. And I get, you can make the argument, oh, well, he hasn't been playing well. He's been injured a little bit. He wants a fully guaranteed contract. Like, yeah, but you'll make your money back if you got Lamar Jackson starting over Kyle Trask. You'll at least like be on the fringe of making the playoffs. So, I mean, I don't know. I just think that like that whole thing, like, yeah, of course they're gonna come out and say, oh, we're not interested for like a couple days, and then behind the scenes
they came out right
working
away though. They came out so fast.
They had it ready to go. They're gonna bid on it.
It's so weird. That's so weird. I agree with you. There's no incentive to come out and say we want him, but like they had it ready to go. Like I'm already on the phone with Diana Rossini to tell her, hey, we're not interested. Like, or like she calls me, I just go ahead and say, the new league year hasn't started. We have no idea. Like we have a lot of things going on. Like they can give a non-answer, but like everyone came out proactively to be like, no, we're not doing it. We're not interested. It just seemed fishy.
The other interesting part to this, if I'm not mistaken, Lamar doesn't have an agent.
No,
and so
he's not.
With a lot of this that's going on, how much of it, and look, we know how the NFL works, especially during free agency. You have agents that put propaganda out there through their media sources and whatnot. Some of this could absolutely be some of these agents that are looking to maybe, hey, can I slide in there and do a deal for Lamar? I think you have that angle to it. And then you also just like, I just don't understand, how this market's moving. And I think you can place some of it squarely on Lamar's shoulders for not having an agent that's actively working for him. I know some of these guys look at these contracts and be like, look, the contracts are already written. I just need a comparable contract to player X that's in the same market or maybe signed a deal last year. I just need to beat those numbers. But for Lamar's position and what he's sitting in, he needs an agent that's actively doing some damage control for this free agency and the way things are coming, especially if owners are out there colluding against him due to the fully guaranteed contract, hit back on Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's so strange to think about. Like there could be collusion in some senses. There could not be. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that there was, essentially a quarterback was blackballed from the NFL. I think that we've seen that before, but this is also a lot different situation because this is a 26-year-old former MVP winner who's still got plenty of juice left in the tank, not a 1-year flash in the pan guy who is on the wrong side of a, thing that like these guys only care about money. If it'll make them money, they're going to do it. And so that at the end of the day, like, some of these options are very clear as to what's going to happen, for better or worse. Just like it is what it is.
Last one that we still have to talk about is the offensive lineman market in terms of first overall pick. Looking at our odds table, you could see the Paris Johnson had himself a decent combine. It was kind of, I think, a couple of guys up there with Peter Skoronski as well. I think Scott mentioned Broderick Jones made himself some money moving up the draft board too, in terms of how he measured. This is another market that I think is going to be very interesting because I look at some of the teams towards the bottom of the first, and you can make a case for offensive line for a handful of them. So in terms of Connor, I'll start with you. Who you think, if there's a play at number one, and really maybe what you think the over under for this market's going to be?
Honestly, I think Paris Johnson is probably still the best look. It just seems like based on what we've seen from like sharp mocks that he's kind of a tier ahead of a lot of these guys. But like Scott mentioned, Broderick Jones got a ton of hype after the combine. Darnell Wright has been, and the drumbeat on Darnell Wright has been really wild. I know Daniel Jeremiah's been pumping him up. He's shot up from like 40-1 to like 10-1 at this point, 9 plus 950 at FanDuel, plus 750 at DraftKings. I think that if you want to take a longer shot, he's probably the one. Otherwise, I think Paris Johnson is probably the good look. Skoronski's arms came up pretty short, and that's like a big deal for, a lot of teams. I'm not an offensive line guru, but I just know that some teams care about that a lot. So in terms of an over-under, though, I think we're looking at, 4.5, 5.5, maybe, because Osiris Torrance has been commonly mocked to the Jags at the end of the first round and a couple other teams, but I think he's kind of like on the fringe there. DeJuan Jones as well, like kind of been like a fringe first guy as well. So yeah, I would probably put it at 5.5 with some juice, one way. So I don't know, Scott, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, look, going into the combine, the way things were kind of broke down to me from an offensive line standpoint was that Skoronski probably plays, the way you want and is the most NFL ready as far as his play. But he's also probably maxed out a little bit more higher towards the top of what his potential is. Broderick Jones was going to be the guy that had the highest ceiling as far as like potential and the way things went. And that Paris Johnson was the best mix of those two, so that he was probably the top overall offensive lineman. I think there's an outside shot for Broderick Jones to be the first offensive lineman taken. I think, you have some things there, the way he tested and the way he looked there at the combine. I think you're going to have some people go back and look at his tape and see some things. And I think he has an outside shot. And I really don't mind that plus 380 right there. So that's a play that I might go ahead and put a little bit on, just a small sprinkle just to get some action on that. But, this is, you start looking at the teams that go ahead and are going to need offensive linemen, specifically Tennessee. And they're a team that I think if you start sniffing around some of the information that's out there, I think you'll be able to get some, a good feel for which person and what player they're leaning, whether that is Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, or whatnot. So I kind of do like the Broderick Jones play a little bit, but I think Paris Johnson right now is the favorite. You start looking at his wingspan, which a lot of GMs really care about for that left tackle position, and he came in with an 85 and 1/8 wingspan, which is 95th percentile for offensive linemen. So I think right now he's the leader in the clubhouse, but I don't mind the Broderick Jones numbers there.
This is going to be another market where I think the total in the first round is really interesting, because if you look at a variety of mocks that are out there, you skipping down, like Osiris Torrance has been mocked pretty commonly in the mid to late first. You'll see some mocks with Anton Harrison up there pretty comfortably. Somebody's not even there. DeJuan Jones is another one that had a really nice combine with some of his measurables. There are some teams that just maybe need a center, and some people really love John Michael Schmitz. And you've seen some of him even late in the first round. So, maybe he becomes, kind of a teetering point in terms of what the number is. Some teams love Cody Munch, the kid from North Dakota State, who has a little bit of that like Cole Strong in him in terms of, interior offensive lineman that is not necessarily sexy measurables, but the tape is pretty good. So it's actually a pretty interesting class. A lot of these guys are going, mid to late first and mid second, but in terms of over under, it's going to be an interesting market to kind of see how that populates. So it's going to be, any leans, I'll go to you, Scott, here in terms of what that number will be posted at.
Yeah, I think that number is going to come out at 4.5 is where I think when I start looking at who's kind of there right now. You're talking about Johnson, Skoronski, Jones, and Torrance. We talked about Michael Schmitz kind of moving that, but I think this line is going to come in at 4.5, and I think you're going to have it's going to be a tight. It's really going to be a play where I don't think you get to 6. It's either going to be 5 or it's going to be 4, and you're going to have to really keep your ears to to what's going on, leading up to that draft. So that line, that specific over and under is a line that I would wait closer to draft day to go ahead and bet as far as the offensive linemen go, because you're going to start hearing some things the closer you get that's going to give you a lot better information to go ahead and make that decision as what side of that to bet. But I think it's going to be tight at 4.5.
Yeah, and betting these markets with the total over under of positions, I mean, can be really sweaty. You mentioned it earlier, but like we bet over 1.5 safeties last year, and then the last 2 picks of the first round, Lewis Seen, finally went, and
Dax
they're like,
Hill.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, Dax Hill and Lewis Seen, who I like. You have to feel like you have a really good edge. So I felt like we took over 1.5. I thought both of those guys were very much live to be middle to end of late round, first round picks. So we had kind of 2 outs. Thankfully, both of them came in somehow. One of them, I thought one of them would for sure, but you kind of like you have to feel really good about a Osiris Torrance here to take over 4.5, or DeJuan Johnson or Anton Harrison. Like, I don't think it's enough to be like, well, I think one of them will go. There are multiple outs, but like you got to feel good about it, and some team matches as well. So that's kind of how I start building it. They don't have those markets out yet, but I do think 4.5 juice towards the over, 5.5 juice towards the under, pretty heavy would make a lot of sense.
There's some interior defensive linemen that could be, populating down in that range too. It's a position that, there's some teams down there late, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, New Orleans that could use that position. That can change the calculus of it too. So it is definitely a sweaty market, but definitely one that is fun to bet on, and one that I think Scott's point is correct. That, those markets are going to populate. We're going to feel like firing into them right away, unless the books make a mistake and hang it, a full player lower than we're thinking. You're best off to wait. Again, like the point I made at the top, there's some out there right now, and I'm not going to tell you not to do that. Personally, and this might surprise you, I'm not a big gambler. I don't love going to play craps. I don't want to go play. I like to bet on the ponies, but I don't like to do random things like that. I want to have an edge. I want to feel like I have some knowledge and some information. So I love to bet, but I don't love to gamble. And I feel like right now, I feel like we're gambling a little bit. I feel like we have some information, but again, without being at free agency, without being at some of these things happening pro days, we are still a little bit of straight gambling. And I think there are definitely ways to do this in a smarter way, let the market take shape. Very different. And I think our friend VR Vegas Refund had said this too, like, it's not necessarily a situation we like to do. To hear Connor and I touting a lot of like, hey, minus 200 on this player prop, or we're going to take this money line because we love, this side. But I think information betting is a little different than, sides and totals, where I'm a little bit more comfortable feeling like I have an edge with some information, and I'm going to lay some juice in a spot. Maybe I wouldn't typically do that on a typical NFL bet. So be patient, proceed with caution, have fun, do what you got to do, but wait, we're going to get more information.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's because, and you mentioned it a little bit here, but a minus 200 bet that should be minus infinity is way more valuable than a plus 300 bet that should be like minus 110. It's like when you know the answer, if you have the answer, just bet it, bet it, max it out. And we will have a lot of the answers, or like a 99% lean on something that we're very, very confident, barring, a crazy gas mask or something else, happening on draft day.
That's a good point. Scott, anything else for the folks before we wrap it up?
Look, I think when we're talking about a lot of the stuff that and reactions that happen from the combine, I think something that's important is not to make too big of a lean one way or another from any information that's coming out of the combine. What I've typically seen over the last few years is the way it usually works is you have the pre-combine hype, you have the post-combine hype. So that's the phase that we're in right now. A lot of the real information is going to start coming out here over this next week. So I'll be digging in deep to getting into some of the information that I have and some of the scoops and lines that I have open to get some information and just digging deep over this next week. I think that's where a lot of the information, and you're going to be able to start getting some of these leans that are going to make the whole big picture clear for some of the teams and some of the players that are going to go within the top 10 and some of these other positions. Pay attention to some of these beat writers. There's small nuggets that are mixed into things that don't seem like they're that big of a deal. And just some of the player talk that you hear from GMs and coaches can very much sway exactly the information that you're looking for based upon how they describe some of these players. The last thing I'll say, look, we kind of talked about it a little bit. The two teams that I think you need to be paying attention to most right now is going to be Indianapolis and Carolina. And I think they're the two teams that are going to be the most in play to go ahead and move up. Connor and I talked about it, as far as that first overall pick goes. Is Chicago going to want to move all the way down with Carolina? I don't know if that's too deep, but I think Carolina is the most desperate team to move up and get a quarterback right now. And I think Indianapolis is going to be the other team that you're really looking at moving into that top spot. These other teams, when we're talking about Houston, and, looking at a quarterback, it's just a matter of how are they grading out, Stroud versus, Bryce Young. Is there that big of a difference in what their overall grade is to make a decision to move up? I don't really see it with these top two guys, but for a team like Indianapolis and a team like Carolina, I think they're going to have to make a move to go up and get their guy.
Love it. Can't wait. We're going to be back next week to do it all again. Another week, more information. Again, listening to the audio version of the podcast, we appreciate it. Subscribe there, comments, reviews. We appreciate all that. We have a new YouTube channel, 4for4 Bets. If you want to check out 4for4 Football, lots of other great fantasy content. You can get more prospects. How does this relate to fantasy football? How does this relate to Dynasty League football? All of those things on the 4for4 Football YouTube page. 4for4 Bets will continue to have more relevant betting content. A reminder again, 4for4.com/plans is the way to get the betting subscription. It gets you literally everything on our site. Again, best way to get access to that, you jump in our Discord, you get push notifications. Connor, Scott, and I make bets. Boom, you get a notification on your phone. You don't have to be sweating this like we are. We get paid to do this, and we get to do it for you. So we want to help drag you along and help make some money for you. You want to get it for just a taste, a little bit cheaper, a little short subscription, $15 over at Vivid. Go into your app store, download Vivid. It's a pick'em game. If you're familiar with it, parlay pick'ems for any sport. Connor's going to be hammering out college basketball stuff for you here too. You can make some money on Vivid. $15 deposit. Promo code 4for4bets is going to get you that betting subscription for just a couple of months. Get you a taste of all of that. So for Connor and Scott, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah!